Railroad engineers, have you ever come across anything creepy or weird on the tracks while driving your train? I work in Houston as an engineer, and we usually parked around town between 10-20 miles per hour. Slow enough for a naked crackhead to jump out of a bush by a city park and start pleasuring herself in front of the engine. I guess she really likes trains. Freight train conductor here. Wanna know what's creepy or weird? When people try to get across the tracks last second or play chicken with my 30 million pound train. You're not playing chicken with an inanimate object, you're playing with me and my engineer. When you lose, and it happens far too often, I get to see your exploded carcass flipping at 150 RPMs off the track and deal with the overwhelming feeling of guilt. Please don't try to beat a train. I work as a backup janitor when the normal one isn't available. I've seen some very weird things at the places I've cleaned. There's the use-all needles and beer cans. Not that shocking after a while, but the weirdest thing I have ever seen was when I was called out to a train yard to clean out some disused engines. These things hadn't been used since the mid-90s and were going to be sold for scrap as they were too battered to be refurbished. But I was warned beforehand that there might be a bum in one of them. But I brushed off since I had seen many bums at the various places I cleaned. They usually just ran off when they saw me coming. So I drive out to the engines and park my truck and get out. Nothing is creepy at this point, just some rotting diesel engines. I had seen much more creepy things before. I walk up the railing and kick in the door with little force. It didn't even have a lock anymore. I walk in and I immediately notice something very odd. It is a near mint condition. Great, I think. One less room to clean. But then I notice something very disturbing. A skeleton perched against a wall. Then I notice that it's wearing a leather jacket and clutching a pill bottle in its bony hands. It was a suicide. I walk a bit closer and grab the pill bottle from its hand. The prescription date was the 10th of September 1996. Over 10 years ago. This guy had been rotting in a train for 10 years and nobody noticed his absence. I pressed the button on my radio and told the guard to call the cops. There's a dead guy in here and he's been here for a decade. About 5 minutes later a cop car pulls up and an off-duty cop steps out and walks up to the train. Turns out that this man had been missing since 1997 and nobody cared enough to look for him. He was an elderly man who lost his wife and offed himself in a train. He laid there for 11 years and was never disturbed. When they buried him a few days later I was the only one to come. All of his family was dead or didn't care enough to come. Up in the coal mines of Wyoming they have what rail crews call the Golden Arches. It's just a yellow painted framework that has speakers on it that the empty coal trains pass through. A warning is played on repeat saying in Spanish and English, "Danger. Get out. This car is about to be loaded." Loaded coal cars get dumped at power plant pits where huge augers break it up. I guess more than a few poor souls have been augered up accidentally after being covered up with coal. Went by a few movie shoots. Biggest one was the first Transformers movie. The scene where Bumblebee gets caught. A lot of movies are shot in that area by the First Street Bridge in LA. Pretty sure there is a P studio not far from there too. Locomotive engineer from the Northeast US here with 15 years service. Aside from the dead animals I think finding a body that was hit by a previous train might have been the creepiest. I've hit a few cars and people before but I never had to go back and look. That's the conductor's job. The person we found wasn't really identifiable as a human being, just a pile of meat. What gave it away were the scraps of clothing mixed into the pile. As far as weird things, there are a few people out there that are really in love with trains. You can use your imagination as to what these grown men do in the middle of nowhere at 2 AM. I'm a conductor, so I'm the guy that sits directly to the left of the engineer. I haven't been doing it for too long yet, so I probably haven't seen the amount of stuff a qualified engineer has. My first week as a trainee on the job we came across a dead pony next to the tracks that must have been hit only a few hours earlier. The next morning going back the other way we passed by it again and it looked like what you would expect to see on a Discovery Channel show. Scavengers had gotten to it that night and it was maybe half a pony at this point. Nature is pretty rad. I'm a railway engineer in the UK. This time of year is the worst for suicides, with 2 in the last 2 days on the route I work on. I've been track inspecting before and from the cleanup of a suicide the night before they've missed a few bits, so what appears to be a bit of skull or kneecap can be seen. The worst bit is the smell. You become aware of the drug spots across the route too, with the number of needles under bridges. I've seen bongs made out of all sorts. Worst to this day, half a used fleshlight. My gut wrenches the most when I see pets. Cats and dogs are frequently found. Some aerosols in certain spots are taping or gluing used needles to our access gates too. Total sickos. My first time on a train, I was traveling in Germany with my grandfather, and he noticed and pointed out to me that we were riding on the wrong tracks. We were northbound on the southern track. Our curiosity got the better of us when I pointed out that there were some guys in bright yellow vests doing some kind of maintenance. And then we noticed that there was blood and meat all shredded up on the tracks. We were going really slow cause of the workers, and we watched intently and tried to figure out what kind of animal it had been. But no hooves or fur were discernible. Then we went quite a distance without seeing many chunks, but the tracks were still bloody. Then there it was, a blue dress. I worked on the signaling for the light rail system in Pittsburgh, USA. We would do all of our testing late at night after revenue hours. Lots of wildlife around the tracks. As we were moving along at about 50 miles per hour, a white-tailed deer jumps out onto the tracks and we clobber the poor thing. The engineer doesn't hesitate, gets on the radio and tells Central Control to call Hannibal Lecter, and gives the milepost. I look at him sideways but he doesn't explain. We continue our run into the city, turn around, and head back out the same way. As we come up on the site where we hit the deer, there is a guy in full camouflage on the side of the railroad butchering the carcass, with a big pile of steaming deer guts next to the track. Did I mention it was about 15 degrees Fahrenheit and snowing? Engineer gives a toot on the horn and we continue with our run. Dad's our guy in a bigger city yard. He's seen so much death. So much death. Mostly suicides. People jumping in front of trains or laying down on the tracks. He says if you don't lay the right way it can actually take you a few minutes to die because the weight of the cars seals off anything broken. So even if you're ripped in half it takes a few minutes to bleed out. Conductor here, hoping to ruin your hopes and dreams of hearing about weird stuff. I have hit fridges, hay bales, a few cows, and I've seen a lot of people getting it on beside the tracks. I guess trains are an aphrodisiac of some kind for people. Conductor here. One time in the middle of the night in the middle of winter, 10 degrees and a foot of snow on the ground, my train went into emergency. I had to walk the length of the train to see what the problem was. The train was right in the middle of a very small town. As I'm walking by one of the houses on the outskirts of this town, I see a guy standing in the driveway about 50 feet from me wearing a trench coat and a sock hat type thing. The first thing that struck me as odd is that it was way too cold to be wearing just a trench coat. I shine my lantern on the guy, wave, and say hi. Nothing. The guy doesn't even move. I continue walking past the guy to the end of the train while looking back very often. I get to the end, turn around and head back. I get back to the house where this guy is standing and he is still there in the same place in the same position. I don't even say anything this time. I just speed walk back to the head of the train. The next day I'm taking a train back home during the day. I'm paying special attention to this house as we go by it. There is nothing there. The drive isn't shoveled. Nothing is there that could have been mistaken for a guy in a trench coat. I have since been by this house dozens of times and I have never seen a car parked there, or a light on or anything at all. I thought I found a dead baby under a bridge. I was stopped waiting for my signal and I noticed a bundle of clothes and what looked like the body of a small child underneath the bridge. My heart was pounding like crazy as I approached it. Turned out it was a doll, some used needles, and some discarded clothes. I was relieved. As a previous train driver in Sydney, Australia, there were 2 spots to look for naked women who would regularly sunbathe naked in fire backyards in summer. I've also ran over a lot of stuff like bikes, shopping trolleys, carts and a lounge. NZ here. We've hit sculptures, trolleys etc. Our nearest major incident was when Mila saw a kid dragging a manhole cover onto the tracks. Call TC for an all train stop. It's not funny. A manhole cover could easily take a train off the tracks, and this was on a bridge over water. There is a routine here in Tokyo to deal with people on the rails. The government even charges a fee to the family of suicidal guys, given they interrupted the traffic. My favorite about that is the signs in the stations. If someone commits suicide, the signs say as much in Japanese, but the English is passenger injury. Yes, a very serious injury. I'm an engineer on a class 1 on the west coast. 9+ years of seniority, with 7 being as an engineer. Have never seen anything creepy or mysterious though, but have hit plenty of unfortunate animals, and trespassing incidents are as sky high as ever. Also, train riders may be decent sometimes, but a lot of them are criminals and some are very dangerous. Every so often a story pops up where some suburban kid decides to ride the rails and ends up dead. It's not a safe environment for anyone. So, nothing ghostly or mysterious to report, but please make sure you stay well clear of the tracks. We do not like hitting people. We don't sign you to watch people die, and a lot of co-workers have a degree of PTSD afterwards. My brother was a lifeguard and used to walk to work across several train tracks. One day, a train was stopped on one of the tracks and my brother saw a figure lying prostrate next to the train in a pool of blood. It turns out the guy had tried to crawl underneath the train while it was stopped, only to have the train start moving while he was underneath it. The guy must have been about 60 years old. The train had crushed one of his legs. Being a lifeguard, my brother made a tourniquet, called 911, etc. The man survived, but his leg had to be amputated. The paramedics said that he would have died within the hour from blood loss if my brother hadn't been there. Probably the strangest, most messed up thing would be the time we hit a flock of sheep at line speed, 110 kph or about 70 mph. No idea how they got there. Guess the fence fell over or the gate was left open, but the first I saw of them was what appeared to be long grass covering the tracks ahead. A second later we realize they are sheep, so start leaning on the whistle. A matter of seconds after that and we're on top of them. Can't forget the awful, continuous noise it made, nor can I unsee the bits of wool and guts on flicking up onto the windscreen. The smell itself was horrendous, especially once the heat of dead sheep started cooking itself on hot traction motors underneath. Not a train engineer, but once as a kid, 13-14, I was forgotten at a skating rink lock-in. About 8 AM the owner said that she had to go, so I took off walking towards home. It was about 12 miles away. After about a mile, I knew I could get on the tracks and it would take me right in front of my house. I was walking when I heard a train was coming in the distance. I moved off about 30 feet. As it approached, to the side away from the tracks, I witnessed a dog walk up to the tracks and lay its head flat on one of the tracks. As the train was getting closer I called for the dog. I was about 50 feet away. It did not respond. I am sure the conductor did not see it, but it severed the dog's head away from the body. I was totally freaked out. I cried for about an hour. Then I decided to bury the dog with the rocks beside the tracks. I still had about 3 hours before I would arrive home walking. I thought for a moment that this was a sign that I should do the same. As I walked, I came to the conclusion that I witnessed this, so I would not ever take my own life, since it was very disturbing to those left to witness. I've told this story to others since, and one time a vet tech told me that the dog must have known it was sick. When I got home and the others woke up, I told them about what I had witnessed and they accused me of making it up since they forgot me. It stuck with me for a long time. My dad was one for a while. He was working at a station one day and there was a woman crying on one of the benches. A few of the staff asked if she was okay or needed help, but she completely ignored them. Next thing they knew, she threw herself in front of one of the express trains. They were finding pieces of her as far as the next station along. Friend of the family is a now retired railroad man. He was in a caboose during World War II on an ammunition train when it exploded and he somehow got out alive. Another time very close to the same place of the explosion they had to stop the train one night. Engineer called back saying they were going to be there a while so he could get off and stretch his legs. He did just that and stepped off a bridge and fell about 20 feet and broke a leg. I'm not a train engineer per se, but I've spent lots of years working on the signals of the East Coast. I'd say one of the most interesting things I've seen are the villages of people that really pop up in the right spots. Tons of people, dogs, homeless villages with friendly people who aren't afraid or embarrassed ever at all. Also, in some mountain towns of West Virginia, there are some unique folks with tracks running through their properties. My grandma grew up with train tracks just feet from her front door. Train tracks in the front yard, the Big Sandy in the back, are Kentucky. Working in a tunnel with 2 other colleagues one time, and we all heard a woman screaming down the tunnel. Like in the films when a woman sees a dead body or a man with a gun, kinda loud hysterical screaming. 2 of us start sprinting towards the noise, and after 5-10 minutes we realize there is nothing there at all. No noise or sign of people. We are so sure we heard screaming we go to the next station supervisor, who informs us there is absolutely no one working around that was close enough for us to hear. We were in the deep underground section and we all heard that same noise that was creepy. My brother-in-law oversees the maintenance of all kinds of trains. He said that all sorts of weird crap ends up on the front of trains. Most notably, he once had to remove a human head embedded in the front. Where the rest of the body is, we'll probably never know. As a passenger, I saw a dead horse shriveled and leathered by the sun. Kinda freaked me out. My dad works on the trains in Northern California. Quite a few years ago, the foreman of the shop told him to check out the underside of the train and clear any debris. Wild dogs frequently get hit by the trains and can sometimes cause problems. A few minutes with a flashlight and my dad sees part of a skull with long brown hair attached. Turns out the train had hit a drunk from a nearby homeless camp that had passed out on the tracks, and the wild dogs kept getting hit because they were eating the poor bastard. Well, I'm not in the railroad industry, but my buddy is a conductor, and while he was driving his train, a girl ran out of a chapel in her wedding dress right onto the tracks. And well, you know the ending. He was in therapy for quite a while. I was working at a BNSF railway in Stockton, CA, maintaining the cranes that pull cars off the tracks, when a freight engine rolled in with the front end a little caved in, covered in red. The entire front end was covered in what appeared to be red bloody chunks. A paste left over from rolling through maybe a herd of cattle or a horde of zombies. I didn't know what to think. I felt my stomach churn, and my co-worker turned green and heaved a bit. I asked the foreman what happened. He told me some teenager jumped out in front of it. Later, I grew a pair and walked up to it as these folks were cleaning it without any signs of being affected by the sight. Turns out the train hit a stalled fiberglass trailer filled with tomatoes that was headed to the Hunt's Cannery in Oakdale. Doctor, you seem fine to me. Okay, I guess I'm healthy then. Doctor, no, you have 2 months left to live, but dang, look at that butt. Hashtag feature me. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.